Hello, I'm Robin Vincent and welcome to Surface Sessions on this, a blustery summer's day in February. Today we're going to be looking at how to set up your Surface Pro 4 for music making, what you need, how to do it and what it looks like. So when you think about making music on the Surface or on any computer, it's very easy to assume that we're talking about electronic music, you know, loops and beats and whatnot. Well, it certainly can be, but it can also be this. Or this. And I will cry when you go away, yeah. The Surface is just an empty vessel for your music. You can make whatever sort of music you like, write whatever you like, compose whatever you like, record whatever you like, in whatever style you wish. It's a multi-track recorder, a score writer, a MIDI sequencer, a sampler, a virtual sound and instrument generator. It lets you create music, put together songs, arrange and mix and produce your tunes. And of course you can make loops and beeps as well. But how do we do any of that? Well, we do it with a combination of software and hardware. The software is your virtual studio into which you create, compose, produce, mix and make all your crazy tuney stuff. And hardware, which gives you the physical connection so you can plug stuff in. So to get started, let's get hold of a piece of music making software. Pop along to openlabs.com and download and install StageLight. There's a free version that has everything you need to start making music. StageLight is what we call a DAW, a D-A-W, which stands for Digital Audio Workstation, which is kind of an increasingly inaccurate term to describe a piece of software that gives you the ability to record sound, record audio, has a MIDI sequencer to allow you to record and edit notes from a MIDI device and then send that out to some other MIDI synth or sound module. It has virtual sounds, synthesizers and instruments that can act as MIDI sound modules. And it has a mixing facility to let you mix your tracks together, add effects, produce it and all tumble it down into a single audio file that you can send to a record company and become a star. Or stick on some website somewhere that no one will ever listen to. So what about hardware? Well, we're going to come onto that into a bit more detail in a minute, but for now we're just going to be using the Surface's onboard audio system, which consists of speakers and a headphone socket. Right, let's get some sound out. So it's run StageLight. When you get to the front page, tap on Lessons, tap on Demo Songs, and then choose something like the Megafauna. Now StageLight has two sides to it. One side is kind of like a loop player, a performance tool where you just tap a thing and a loop plays and you can play lots of loops and stuff. And the other side is the more traditional sort of DAW multi-track view where you record music in a horizontal plane across the screen against a timeline on individual tracks. Groovy. Now the sound is coming out of the onboard speakers, which is fine, but it does sound a bit tinny. But we do have this headphone output here that we could connect to larger speakers to get a larger, more interesting, more awesome sound for your fantastic music. So let's do that. So I've got a cable here which is connected to some speakers up here out of shot. I'll plug that in the side. And now we're going to have our music coming through our nice big speakers. Except it's not. It's still coming out of the little speakers, not out of the big speakers. The reason for this is that on the Surface Pro 4, the inbuilt speakers and the headphone socket are treated as individual devices with their own drivers and their own sort of software addressable endpoints. What does this mean? Well, it means that in order to automatically switch between speakers and headphones, the software has to be specifically written in order to do that. So sort of games and regular Windows apps cope with that fine, but something like Stage Lite treats audio drivers very differently, and it sees them as completely independent. Let me close this quickly and demonstrate it in Windows Groove. So let's open up some music. Now that's currently coming out of the speakers up here, and when I pull the headphone socket out, it's now coming out of the onboard speakers automatically. Plug my headphones in, and now it's coming out of there. I mean, you can see that there's a delay in doing that. That's Windows automatically readjusting that driver so it's going out of the right place. Groovy, as they say. But back in Stage Lite, is not able to do it. I mean, something happened. I don't know if you heard that sort of glitch there. So Stage Lite understood that something has occurred, but it wasn't able to resolve that into a change of driver. So let's look at the audio options in Stage Lite. All DAW software gives you a lot of control and configuration over the audio system because it's very, very important for getting sound in and out successfully. So under audio in here, if we have a look at the audio devices that are available to us, the only one that refers to the Surface Pro Audio's drivers is the one here that says speakers. There are other things here too, but that's because I've installed other bits and pieces. But if you're doing this for the first time, you're only really going to get the option for speakers. So how do we change it to headphones? Well, in order to do that, we have to get out, plug the headphones in, give it a second, go back into options, audio, and now we have a second option entitled headphones, which is awesome. So I can now select headphones. Yeah, see, that's given that a bit of a go. Press OK. And now it's coming out of my slightly overloud speakers. So it's not ideal, and we're going to find this happens in all music production software because it sees those drivers as independent. But can we do anything about it? Well, yes, we can, in the size and shape of a USB audio interface. And we'll get onto that in a minute. In fact, a USB audio interface is the solution to probably all of the problems you have with making music on a Surface. But for the moment, we're going to persevere with the onboard sound because it's there and because you can use it and should be able to use it just by plugging in a pair of headphones and making music. And that is all completely possible. So we've got sound out. Great. What do we do next? Well, we want to start making some music. Now, there are two ways we can do that. We can use audio, we can record sound in, or we can use pre-recorded audio or samples to put together a bunch of loops and noises and things. Or we can enter notes into Stage Lite, which then play MIDI devices, synths, or virtual instruments, or a combination of the two. So let's start with a fresh project. You just go to Home, we'll go Play, we'll pick Trap. Now, in this particular demo, it already has one loop already loaded. So that's a loop of audio that's already in the system, that's been put onto that particular clip, and I can then launch it. I can do to another one by pressing on plus, and then you can choose from all the samples which are loaded in here. So let's take that one, let's add that one in. So now I've got a loop of audio there. which I can swap with this one. So the other side is dealing with MIDI notes. Let's start off with this drum track here and open it up, and it gives me a grid on which I can play these various notes. So I can stick in a kick drum, for instance, at various points. I could stick in a hi-hat like that and the odd snare. Let's see how that sounds. As simple as that. For something more melodic, let's select this lead synth here, double open the clip, and we've got a picture of the piano down the side and a grid over here onto which I can add notes. Let's tap in a few. Set that going. And because it's MIDI, I haven't recorded any sound, I've just recorded notes, so I can go in and change how the synth is sounding. Or I can change the sound completely. And then of course I can play the whole lot together. Yay, we're making music! Now entering notes with your finger on the screen and stuff is great and groovy in that, but Stage Lite also has a virtual keyboard and virtual drum pads built in, so you can actually play notes in real time. So let's have a look at the drums. Down the bottom here you've got a bunch of drum pads, and if I select the synth I've then got a keyboard, which looks a bit weird, so let me just change that into a regular keyboard. There we go. The other version of the keyboard is called a key lock, which just gives you notes in a certain key, which is an awesome way of staying within the right key when you're composing music. But you can also just have a general keyboard, which is awesome. So now I could just hit record and start playing in. So let me get to a new one here. Let's press record. And I can do the same on the drums. Okay, now if you know me, you know that I am blistering hot on the finger drums. I'm awesome at it, and that just sounded rubbish, which brings us into a whole area that we like to call latency. Now, latency is a dreaded word that spells doom for all music making on computers. Well, not really, but it's something which is a bit of a problem, and playing drums on here really highlights that problem. The problem is that it takes a certain amount of time for the computer, for the CPU, to generate the sound when you hit something. And when the computer takes a little bit too long about that, we experience that as a delay between hitting the key and hearing the sound. Now we're talking about really small delays. It doesn't take much for it to be noticeable and for us to be able to feel it as some kind of drag on our playing. which makes playing percussion in particular actually really difficult. You probably can't see this, it's difficult, but let's see if I can just do a close-up on the pad here so you can... Can you see how that's just a sort of a split second behind the touch, and that makes it awkward to play? Because what you want is you want it to feel like it's real time. You want it to feel like you've just pressed something and something has happened instantaneously. Now, real time is a very subjective term, but generally speaking, something under 10 milliseconds is what most people would consider to feel like real time. With Windows 10, the audio driver architecture was rewritten to enable a really low latency mode. However, it still requires the software to be written specifically to address those low latency modes. And DAW software, like StageLight, doesn't do that because it uses a different protocol. And so it's only able to use the standard mode drivers, which are going to give us around about 30 milliseconds of latency. And that's just too much for real-time playing. It doesn't feel comfortable. You can get away with it on a synth. But it just doesn't feel quite right. Now, is there something we can do about this? Well, yes, there is. The best solution is, again, to get a USB audio interface, which will completely sort that out. But as we're sticking with the onboard sound for the moment, is there another solution? Well, thankfully, yes, there is. There's something called ASIO for All. ASIO for All wraps up the audio drivers and presents them in a different protocol called ASIO, or ASIO. Stands for something like audio system in out, but nobody really cares. It's the protocol that's used by DAW software to access low latency performance and to access all of the inputs and outputs on a big audio interface. It's the driver we use to get low latency when making music. So pop along to asioforall.com, the 4 being the number 4, and download the latest build, run it, install it, and let's set that up. And we're back. Right, we had to sort of wander off there for a bit because the whole business with ASIO for All became suddenly quite complex. It's all to do with the nature of the drivers for the audio system inside the Surface. They're actually quite clever and interesting, and what ASIO for All tries to do is just wrap those up into another interface, but it has to pull out all the details and display them to you so you can make the right choices. And in the end, what that does is just makes it a bit trickier than it was on the Surface Pro 3. However, I've made a nice, lovely, long, detailed video all about ASIO for All, which you can go and check out if you wish, but here is just the quick and simple version, okay? You download ASIO for All, you install it. When you run your software, you select ASIO for All as the audio driver, and then you get access to this little box, this little control panel that you don't get at any other time. You can't access it without the software being open. And it's down here in this corner as a little green sort of play button down there. And when you open it up, you have this quite poor interface which allows us to turn things on and off, which is what we need to do to make it work. First of all, you need to press the little spanner button, and that'll open up the more detailed version of the interface. And let me show you exactly what to turn on and what to turn off. Okay, you'll see the entry here for the Realtek High Definition Audio, which is the audio driver for the Surface. And then there's this whole bunch of options. The important thing is that the top one, called Realtek Audio Output, is the speakers. The bottom one, Realtek HD Audio Second Output, is the headphone socket, or in this case it's going out to our speakers through this thing here. So if you want it on speakers, you need the first one enabled. If you want it on headphones, you need the second one enabled, and the other one must be disabled. So you see these little power buttons to the side, you have to turn them on and off. Now the other really important thing is that it must be set to the top entry, so the one that says out ×2, 44.1 to 48 kilohertz. So at the moment I'm on the second output, it's set to out 2 times 44.1 to 48 kilohertz. That's what you need. If you're going to use the speakers, you activate the top one and set it also to out 2 times 44.1 to 48 kilohertz. And if you want to change between the two, between speakers and headphones, you're going to have to go in and disable and enable the other one. It's just how it is. In order to get low latency, playable latency off a keyboard or off the screen, you need to install the ASIO for All driver. And you need to faff around with this to swap between the two. But once it's set up, it's set up. It sounds complicated now, but it does get a lot easier. Now, obviously, it's a whole lot easier if you add a proper USB audio interface, which we're going to look at in a moment. So this is only purely when you want to use the Surface all by itself and you need to have a playable latency while you're working. Got it? So as you can see, that's much better. The latency is down, the performance is much better. I can play, it feels like real time, and now we can start making music properly. Now, I really dearly wish that Microsoft would embrace the ASIO format, would write a Windows 10 ASIO driver for all their own hardware drivers that will enable us to make music and connect these things up with low playable latency in a more elegant and integrated way than having to use and fuss around with ASIO for All. Please do it. I know you'd prefer everyone to jump on board to your low latency modes using stuff like that, but I just don't believe it's going to happen. Whereas ASIO is a standard that's been around for decades, and if you would just embrace that, it would make our lives and the lives of all the people starting out making music on the Surface and other such great devices, it would make their lives so much simpler. Thank you. So once we've got things down to a playable latency, we might then want to plug in a MIDI keyboard in order to play it properly rather than playing it on the screen. Here I've got a MIDI keyboard. This is called the Workstation 2. Now this has its own synth, it has its own sounds, but I'm not using it for that. I'm purely going to use it to take the data from the notes from these keys that I play and to play something on the Surface. It's quite a key thing to understand that although it has its own sounds, the output from this, its own sounds will come out of its own output on the back. It doesn't come out of the computer, it comes out of here. However, I'm going to use the keyboard via MIDI over USB to the Surface to play sounds that are on the Surface, and they will therefore come out of the Surface. Yeah, are you with me? I don't know, let's have a look. So, this plugs in via USB, and thankfully we have a port on the side. You can hear the sound of it activating. You can see that it's all lit up to say that it's receiving power from the port. It's bus powered, and there it is. Let's have a look at the device manager. So you can see it's installed. It's installed under Sound, Video and Game Controllers. There it is, the Workstation 2. Installing a MIDI keyboard doesn't have to be complicated. Some of them do require drivers, which you can download from their own manufacturer's website, but most of them actually don't these days. The Workstation 2 doesn't. You plug it in, it finds it. Novation has already provided the driver to Microsoft, and it installs without any bother. So let's see what that looks like in StageLight. Let's go to Options, let's go to MIDI Input, and it's there that we can choose what's going to be the MIDI input into StageLight. So in input slot 1, I can see there's the Workstation 2. I can select it and off we go. So now it should be active in here. I can select a track. So there I am now getting MIDI into StageLight, generating the sound. The sound is coming out of here and out of my big speakers. Sound isn't coming out of here, this is just generating MIDI notes which are playing the sounds that are in StageLight. So let's select the pad, for instance. I can still create the sound on screen. Awesome, that's awesome. So now if I wanted to record something, I could do so from here. So let's select the lead synth. Let's hit that for record. And I've recorded in. Let's stick some drums in. Oh, I'm too high. Let's try that again. Let's stick some pads in. So yeah, groovy, we're making music. We are. I've just improvised an awesome piece of something or other. So MIDI keyboard connected via the USB port with the onboard sounds in stage light coming through the headphone output. There you go, it's that simple, and you're making music on the surface. Now this is really just the beginning, because there's so many more places we can go. For instance, earlier you saw me play guitar and sing. How the heck do I get that into the surface? Good question. Let's have a look at that. So how exactly do I plug a microphone into the surface? I mean, this is the other end of the microphone. It's what's called an XLR cable, and there is nowhere to plug that in. In fact, the Surface doesn't have a mic socket of any kind. It has an integrated mic, which is stuck in the bezel somewhere that you can use with Skype and gaming and dictation and that kind of thing. So there's nowhere to plug this, so we need some kind of device to plug it into, and that is where the audio interface comes in. Now, an audio interface simply interfaces audio to your computer. It's in the name. Here's one. This is the one that I use quite a bit because it's really very simple. Do you see that? This is called an Avid Fast Track Duo because it has two inputs. Very exciting, very well named, these things. On the front here you can see that we have the sort of inputs that our microphone cable would actually really enjoy. Ooh. Yeah, you see? See, that works. Or a guitar could also go in there. Oh, look, headphones as well. I've got some knobs to change the gain. On the back I've got some additional outputs. I could go to speakers, or some additional inputs, so I could plug a synth in. Very exciting. What's this? USB cable, so it connects via USB because it's a USB audio interface. Now this solves a lot of problems. It gets rid of the whole ASIO for all business because it has its own ASIO drivers that give us super low latency, or, you know, playable latency within our audio software. They're also well written, so it's not such a drag on the CPU. It's very efficient and does the audio in and out very well. It also has high quality converters inside, which means that your sound, your audio that you're recording, is going to be recorded at a high quality, not like trying to record through the inbuilt microphone. Also, the playback is also going to be of a high quality because it's not coming out of a little mini jack socket at the side. So a USB audio interface solves a whole number of problems. Yeah, it's another piece of gear to carry around, but it provides you with the connectivity that you need. It provides you with playable latency, high quality sound. What's not to like about that? So let's plug it in, give it a whirl. So the first problem we have then is that we only have the one USB port, and I have now two devices I want to plug in because I want to use my audio interface because it's really good and helpful, but I also want to use my MIDI keyboard, which is really good and helpful. But they both require a USB port. Now, some audio interfaces have a MIDI socket on the back, MIDI in and out on the back, which is awesome. So then you could plug in a MIDI keyboard through this, and this could then act as the interface of the computer. This one doesn't have that, and also that would mean you would have to power that separately rather than have it bus powered over USB, which is very useful. Now the answer is called a USB hub, and I have one of those too. So this is a very boring, very normal USB hub. It's not powered, it takes its power from the computer, and that has some challenges of its own that we'll look at in a moment. But this allows me to plug both of these things in. So let's close stage light. I'm going to take out the keyboard, plug in the hub, ding ding ding. Now I can plug the keyboard back in, and I'm now going to plug in my audio interface. can see on the front here, it's got a little green light, so that tells me something good. Now, for this, I had to install drivers. It's a little installer that comes from the company that makes it. I download it, I double click it, and it installs drivers that make this work. And so I now have both of them installed in the device manager, as I'll show you. There they are. Right, I'll look at the options again, go to audio, and this time I'll be able to choose this as the audio interface, and I'll be able to plug that in differently. So let me show you that. So under the audio device, I can select now Fast Track ASIO, which I will do. It gives me some slightly different inputs and outputs. I'll also check my MIDI input, still set to base station, which is correct, and I'll hit OK. Now I'll be able to plug the cables in the back rather than in here, so I can unplug this. My two phonos here, which I will need adapters for. Adapters like so. They plug into the outputs on the back. So that now gives me output to my speakers. And if I go back into here and select drums, I've now got outputs again like I did before, but instead of coming out of the headphone socket here, I'm now coming out the back of this audio interface. Similarly, I still have my keyboard attached. The other advantage of an audio interface is having, you know, a decent volume knob on something. As well as having a headphone output and a volume knob on that. So ultimately, having an audio interface makes your life so much easier and makes the quality of the sound you get so much better, the feel of playing a keyboard so much more expressive. So I cannot really emphasize enough how useful an audio interface is. Now, one of the things with a USB hub is that this isn't powered, so it's taken all its power from the Surface, and the Surface is now powering an audio interface and a MIDI keyboard, which is, you know, no mean feat off a single USB port. Now on the Surface Pro 3, I was able to put a dongle in here, and then it started flaking out once I'd stuck another sort of thumb drive in. But actually I've had better luck with the Surface Pro 4. So here's a dongle, for instance. This is a software protection dongle for Cubase. Reason also has a similar one, so does Pro Tools, so it's something that you might also want connected. I'm going to plug that in here. Bing, ba, ding. And so that installs, a little light on. Yep, everything's still working. So that's fine. Let me install a thumb drive, a nice big fat one. Plug that in. Yep, that's still there, and that opens up. And that's still working, and this is still working. So the Surface Pro 4 is, I find, able to run 4 devices like this without too much trouble, which is a really good sign. With the Surface Pro 3, I had to invest in a powered USB 3 hub, which I still think is a good idea. Let me show you. So for my Surface Pro 3, I got this, which is a USB 3 powered hub. It takes power there. You plug it into a socket and then USB 3 into the side. And then this gave me 7 USB ports, which is brilliant. And they're all powered, so I could run the audio interface, a keyboard, and another controller, and drives and bits and bobs without them running out of power that's being supplied out of the single USB port. How many devices you can actually run successfully through a single USB port is something that I'll test at another time, but suffice to say that with a regular USB hub, this is just a USB 2 hub, there's nothing flashy about it, I can run my audio interface, my MIDI keyboard, my software protection key, and an extra drive all at once, which is pretty awesome. So now I have my audio interface plugged in. Let's plug in a microphone just to show that working. So here I have my mic. Whoop. And I need to get the other end into here. Here's the other end. Let's stick that into input number 1. Okay, so I plug that in there so you can see it. And then what I do is I turn up the knob here until I can see I'm getting a level here on the green light. If that goes into red, then I know that it's clipping, and you can hear something clipping already. So I'm just going to turn that down a little bit. to there. Great. Now in the software, I'm going to create an audio track. Open up the side, look at the I/O. So audio input channel, it says mono 1. Now as this is input 1, that is probably referring to that. It's not always precise, so we're going to assume that that's right. Let's set that. We can then hit this little speaker icon here, which should give us a level of monitoring through the software. You can hear me coming through the speakers, and also you can see a level being monitored through the software. So what I could do is I could hit record. Oh, I was such a young boy. Oh, I was such a young boy. So, you know, I'm a rock and roll star. How easy is that? It's no problem at all. So I've now recorded that directly into the Surface. I can put other stuff alongside it, like so. Oh, I was such a young boy. 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 So there you are, it's that easy to start making music on your Surface. All you need is a piece of software like Stage Lite, which acts as the recording software. It gives you sounds, it lets you record sound, it lets you play instruments and mix that whole thing together to create your music. It doesn't have to be Stage Lite, it could be Cubase or Pro Tools or Ableton or Studio One or Bitwig or Traction or any number of music production bits of software. And you can use the onboard audio in the Surface to play back the music that you're creating. And if you want it to be more playable with your fingers and like some kind of virtual keyboard, then you need to get the ASIO for All drivers to sort that out. Then you could add something like a MIDI controller keyboard so you can play in using a proper piano type keyboard and stuff. Plugs in via USB and off you go. Then you could add a USB audio interface, which gives you better quality sound, it gives you connection so you can plug in a microphone and a guitar, and gives you lower playable latency when using software instruments. To plug that in together, you need a USB hub. Plug it all in and off you go. So there you have it. And now that we've got the basics covered, I can move on to making videos about all sorts of different bits of music production software and how well they run on the Surface. I'll also do some performance testing, how many plugins they can run, what sort of polyphony it can do, and compare that to the Surface Pro 3. There was one thing that I didn't mention in this video, and that's tweaking Windows 10 for audio. I've been using my Surface Pro 4 totally untweaked so far, and pretty successfully. However, there are a number of things that you can do to make it run better and more stable for music making. And I've done a separate video on that, which you should go and check out. So in the meantime, go and make some tunes like this fella.